Have you ever stepped away from a conversation, feeling hollow, as if someone reached inside your chest and quietly stole your will to keep going? You tell yourself you're overreacting, that everyone feels tired sometimes. But deep down, you know this is different. There are certain people whose presence alone seems to suffocate your purpose, like a damp cloth pressed over the flame of your spirit. They don't shout or threaten. They simply drain you, one quiet moment at a time. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived 4 concentration camps, understood this invisible exhaustion. In Man's Search for Meaning, he wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. But before we can transform, we must first see clearly the hidden forces stealing our life force." Today, you'll discover the 4 types of people Frankl would warn you about. Those who, often without knowing it, feed on your resilience, fracture your sense of meaning, and dissolve your deepest purpose in life. You will meet Isabella, Daniel, and Mila, 3 ordinary souls whose paths are haunted by these subtle destroyers. Their struggle is our struggle, and through their eyes, you'll learn to recognize, confront, and ultimately free yourself from the psychological traps that keep you bound. This is more than a lesson. It is a call to awaken, to reclaim your energy, your vision, and your reason to endure. Because your energy is sacred, and it's time to protect it. Isabella never noticed when it began. At first, her friend Lena only needed a little comfort, a shoulder to cry on after a breakup, a sympathetic ear when work felt cruel. Isabella believed that was what good friends did. They listened without judgment. They stayed up late to reassure. They made space for grief. But soon, Lena's complaints became a river that never stopped flowing. Every message was another story of betrayal. Every phone call ended the same. Isabella felt small, weary, almost ashamed she couldn't fix it. It was as if Lena had discovered a hidden lever in her heart, one that opened the floodgates of guilt. This is the power of the chronic victim, a person who traps you in their cycle of suffering. Viktor Frankl wrote in Man's Search for Meaning, "Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. But the chronic victim narrows that space until you believe you must rescue them, or you are heartless." Existential analysis shows us how easily this dynamic can grow. When you become the permanent caretaker, your own life begins to shrink. You lose the freedom to pursue what Frankl called the meaning of life, the personal purpose that gives you strength to endure hardship. Instead, your days revolve around someone else's despair. Developmental psychology tells us that caretaking becomes compulsive when we confuse empathy with responsibility. When you absorb someone's helplessness as your own, you abandon your existential freedom. You surrender your purpose in life to a cause you can never heal. Isabella began to notice the cost. She stopped reading at night because she was too drained. She skipped her morning walks because she felt she hadn't earned the peace. In small, invisible ways, she was erasing herself. But in the quiet moments, lying awake in the dark, she remembered something Frankl said. Suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. And she realized that Lena's suffering had no meaning. It was an endless loop of complaint, a refusal to grow. To reclaim your energy, you must first see the trap, listen with compassion, but refuse to become the savior. Set boundaries that honor your humanity as well as theirs. Isabella practiced a new sentence, trembling the first time she spoke it out loud. I hear your pain, but I don't have the resources to carry it every day. Something shifted in that moment. She discovered that resilience is not rescuing everyone. It is preserving your capacity to love without self-destruction. Psychotherapy teaches that true connection is built on mutual respect, not obligation. When your presence is taken as a guarantee, you become an accessory to someone's avoidance of responsibility. In logotherapy, Frankl reminds us that existentialism is not an abstract philosophy. It is the art of choosing meaning, even when it costs us comfort. If your empathy becomes an endless obligation, you are not noble, you are lost, and no one benefits from your slow erosion. Daniel always admired his colleague Jonas, until he realized Jonas had never once praised anything. Every idea was pointless, every plan a waste of time. Even small victories were met with a smirk and the same sentence, why bother? By the end of each week, Daniel's confidence lay in ruins. The cynic is not always cruel in appearance. Sometimes they are the clever voice in the corner, always ready with a sardonic laugh. They disguise their contempt as sophistication, a badge of superiority over those who still dare to hope. But Viktor Frankl believed this masquerade is a defense against their own hollow existence. He observed in man's search for meaning, ever more people today have the means to live, but no meaning to live for. The cynic has everything but purpose, and so they take aim at yours. Daniel began to notice how Jonas's words burrowed into his mind long after he'd left the office. When he lay in bed at night, he could hear that cold voice repeating, "You're naive. You're wasting your time." That is the secret power of the cynic. If you are not vigilant, their emptiness becomes contagious. In existential analysis, this condition is called the existential vacuum, a life stripped of significance, replaced with a hunger that no amount of bitterness can satisfy. It is easier to scorn the dreams of others than to confront your own failure to create meaning. And so the cynic mocks what they secretly yearn for: conviction, wonder, belief. Psychotherapy teaches us that chronic negativity often hides a profound fear of disappointment. If nothing matters, then nothing can hurt you. But this shield comes at a cost: the slow erosion of your own capacity to feel alive. To protect yourself, you must anchor your own meaning of life. Return to the first spark that set you on your path, the quiet certainty that your purpose mattered, even if no one else understood it. Recall why you began, before the cynicism seeped in. One morning, Daniel took a long walk alone. He remembered Viktor Frankl's words, "Life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose." In that stillness, he realized that his project, flawed as it was, gave him a reason to rise each day. That was enough. When Jonas tried to belittle him again, Daniel didn't argue. He simply looked up and said, with quiet clarity, "This matters to me, and that is enough." Philosophy teaches us that purpose is not consensus. It is a personal covenant between you and the life you are here to live. No one else has to believe in it. The cynic thrives on your self-doubt. Withdraw that fuel, and they shrink to the size of their own disillusionment. In logotherapy, Frankl reminds us that resilience is choosing meaning over approval. You do not need universal applause to build something worthwhile. You only need the courage to protect what matters, especially when others do not understand. When Daniel learned this, the cynic's voice grew quiet, and for the first time in years, he felt free. Mila fell in love with someone who made her feel chosen. Every compliment was intoxicating, like a mirror reflecting back all the parts of herself she longed to believe were lovable. In those early days, she was certain she had found her purpose in life. But soon, the demands arrived. Small sacrifices disguised as love. A canceled dinner with friends here. An apology for things she hadn't done there. Each time she hesitated, the warmth turned to cold dismissal. "You're selfish," he'd say, "after all I've done for you." This is the emotional manipulator, the one who weaponizes affection to consume your spirit. Their devotion is a transaction, your freedom in exchange for their approval. Viktor Frankl wrote in Man's Search for Meaning, "Love goes very far beyond the physical person of the beloved. It finds its deepest meaning in their inner self." But the manipulator sees no inner self to cherish, only a resource to control. Psychotherapy teaches us that emotional manipulation thrives when we confuse validation with worth. Developmental psychology shows that if you grew up needing to please to feel safe, you are especially vulnerable to these traps. You become convinced that peace can be bought by diminishing yourself, one compromise at a time. Mila believed she had to earn love by surrendering her boundaries. She began saying yes to everything, because saying no felt like risking the only affection she had. Each concession felt like survival. But over time, survival became a slow erasure. She stopped painting because he called her art childish. She stopped calling her sister because he said it was a waste of time. Until one morning, she looked in the mirror and couldn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were dull. Her voice was barely a whisper. In that moment, she remembered something Frankl had written about existentialism. When a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure. Mila realized she was clinging to the pleasure of his approval because she had lost touch with her own meaning of life. Her purpose had become proving she was enough. To reclaim your energy, you must separate approval from identity. Your worth does not fluctuate with someone's affection. Meaning is not bestowed, it is claimed. When you build your identity on someone else's validation, you forfeit the power to define your own existence. Mila began practicing a single, terrifying word: no. At first, it felt like stepping off a cliff, but the more she said it, the stronger she felt. She discovered that saying no is sometimes the most profound act of self-love. Logotherapy invites us to see that even in suffering, we retain the freedom to choose. Frankl believed that the search for meaning is the primary motivation of human beings, not the search for approval. If someone's love requires your diminishment, it is not love, it is domination. Philosophy reminds us that true love is never conditional on surrendering your soul. Resilience is choosing to stand in your own truth, even when it costs you the illusion of safety. Mila's voice may have started as a whisper, but in time, it became a declaration. I am enough, and I will not disappear to keep someone else comfortable. Months after Isabella escaped Lena's victimhood, she found herself entangled with a different force, her co-worker, Henrik. Henrik didn't ask for help. He simply complained about the weather, the traffic, the coffee, the management, the clients. At first, Isabella thought it was harmless venting. Everyone needed to blow off steam sometimes. But day after day, his negativity was relentless, a silent erosion that sapped her hope. When she walked into the office, she felt her chest tighten in anticipation of his sighs and muttered grievances. No matter how small the problem, Henrik could transform it into proof that life itself was rigged against him. The eternal complainer is deceptively ordinary. Unlike the chronic victim, they don't want rescue. They want company in their despair. They want you to sit beside them in the dark, agreeing that there is no point in trying. Viktor Frankl explained in Man's Search for Meaning, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. But the complainer relinquishes that freedom and invites you to do the same. Their power comes not from their arguments, but from their insistence that optimism is foolish. Existentialism teaches that attitude is the final bastion of autonomy. If you surrender it, you surrender yourself. In existential analysis, this surrender is a quiet kind of death, the slow extinction of possibility. Developmental psychology shows that chronic complaining often begins as a learned strategy for attention or belonging. When children are rewarded for negativity, they grow into adults who cannot feel connection without shared bitterness. It becomes a ritual: lament, agree, repeat. And if you break the pattern, you risk their silent condemnation. Psychotherapy reminds us that while empathy is a virtue, co-rumination is a trap. Listening endlessly to negativity without boundaries doesn't heal anyone. It simply multiplies despair. And when you allow it to take root in your own mind, it begins to cloud your sense of purpose in life. One Thursday morning, after another hour of complaints about things no one could change, Isabella felt herself teetering on the edge of hopelessness. She realized she was starting to see the world through Henrik's eyes, drained of color, stripped of possibility. She paused and thought of Frankl's philosophy. Meaning is not a passive inheritance. It is something you must choose, again and again, no matter how many voices tell you it is naive. She remembered his words. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. With a steady voice, she practiced her new response. I'm sorry you're having a hard day, but I need to focus on something positive right now. She didn't fight Henrik's bitterness. She simply refused to inherit it. Logotherapy teaches that even in suffering, We have the freedom to direct our focus toward what gives life significance. Resilience is not ignoring hardship. It is refusing to let it colonize your spirit. And philosophy reminds us, the meaning of life is never found in endless complaint. It is built in the quiet, daily acts of courage to see beauty anyway. Daniel thought the worst was behind him. He'd learned to withstand cynicism, to protect his purpose in life, and to root his confidence in something deeper than approval. But there was another threat, so quiet he almost missed it. The subtle saboteur, the friend who smiles when you fail, who plants seeds of doubt in moments of triumph. They never criticize you outright. They pretend to be concerned, supportive, protective, but in truth, they are unnerved by your progress. Your growth reminds them of everything they have refused to become. Viktor Frankl believed that envy is the shadow side of meaninglessness. When someone cannot find their own purpose, they will do anything to diminish yours. In man's search for meaning, he warned, life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose. Daniel began to see the pattern. Whenever he shared good news, landing a big client, finishing a project, feeling proud of his work, his friend Martin would tilt his head, smile faintly and say, "Are you sure you're ready for that promotion? It seems risky. I mean, maybe you're not as talented as you think." These comments were never loud or angry. They slipped in like poison in sweet tea. Developmental psychology tells us that the subtle saboteur often learned as a child that worth is measured by comparison. If they cannot stand above you, they will settle for making you smaller. Psychotherapy teaches that we absorb these messages most easily when we secretly fear they are true. Daniel realized that Martin's whispers echoed his own hidden insecurities. If he hadn't questioned them, he might have started shrinking to stay accepted. To withstand this, Daniel embraced existential analysis, examining the places in himself that still needed validation, clarifying what success meant to him, and deciding whose opinion actually mattered. He practiced saying the words in the mirror, "I will not apologize for growing." One evening, after another careful critique from Martin, Daniel took a breath and finally spoke the truth aloud. "I see that you're uncomfortable with my success, but I won't shrink to soothe you." Logotherapy reminds us that every life demands a commitment to something greater, a mission, a calling, a sense of why. Existentialism teaches that you cannot borrow meaning from someone else's comfort. You must build your own. Philosophy shows us that greatness often provokes resistance. Your light can feel like an accusation to those still hiding in the dark, but the fact that your courage unsettles them does not mean you should dim it. Daniel learned that resilience is not only surviving adversity, it is also refusing to let envy shape your destiny. Your joy is not selfish. It is the natural expression of a life fully lived. Never apologize for shining, and never trade your meaning of life for the temporary approval of those unwilling to find their own. Some people will never understand why you guard your energy so fiercely. They will call you cold, selfish, or arrogant. They will say you have changed, and perhaps you have. Because the moment you stop feeding the chronic victim, the cynic, the manipulator, and the eternal complainer, you reclaim something sacred, your right to exist on your own terms. Viktor Frankl taught us that survival itself is an act of meaning. In the darkest places, he discovered the simple truth. Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how. This is your why, your reason to rise, to hope, to create. No one else can define it, and no one else is entitled to siphon it away in the name of love, loyalty, or obligation. Look around your life. Who drains your spirit? Who nourishes it? Whose voice leaves you feeling diminished, and whose presence makes you feel whole again? The answers may hurt, but clarity is the beginning of freedom. Logotherapy teaches that even in suffering, you retain the final freedom to choose your attitude. Existential analysis reminds us that meaning is not a luxury, it is the core of resilience. And philosophy calls us to live deliberately rather than sleepwalking through a life that belongs to other people's expectations. If you are ready to protect your purpose, to reclaim the energy you were born with, subscribe to this channel. Because your story matters, and it's time you lived it, unafraid.